Not one but three of Donald Trump's leading team are in or are going to Israel to try to prop up peace in Gaza. Vice President Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's advisor, his son-in-law Jared Kushner, will try to help support the president's peace plan after the ceasefire was broken at the weekend. Israel launched a wave of missile attacks after 2 Israeli soldiers were killed. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says more than 30 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes. The Times World Affairs editor Philp joins us from Ramallah in the West Bank. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Callum.
Are we clear on the sort of timeline of how the ceasefire broke down over the weekend?
I think it underlines how fragile this is and how complex some of the conditions surrounding it are. It appears that the most likely thing to have happened is that a group of Hamas fighters who detached from the main leadership and command were in an area to which the Israeli military withdrew, and so that they were possibly carrying out a clearing operation there. Because obviously it's still in half of the Gaza Strip, of 53% of the territory, and came across these Hamas fighters. So Hamas have been very quick to jump on this and say that it was not connected to their command. It seems that the ceasefire is back in place, but again, I think it just highlights some of the difficulties involved in this complex process, where a lot of people on the ground, including civilians who were killed in an airstrike over the weekend, don't know where this line that they're meant to keep away from actually is.
Yeah. In terms of I suppose the build-up to this moment, even before the violence, tensions had been quite high, hadn't they? There had been this dispute between Hamas and Israel over the return of the remains of hostages who have died, who had been held by Hamas terrorists. So the peace plan had already been kind of teetering or precarious, perhaps.
Well, not from the American point of view, and this was their deal. They were very, very clear in briefings to journalists that they didn't regard what Israel saw as the slow walking of the return of the bodies as a ceasefire violation. And in fact, there was nothing that covered the absolute having to have those bodies back within a certain time frame that would mean the end of the deal. Now, Hamas's case is that they haven't been able to retrieve all the bodies and they don't have the equipment to do so. The Americans stepped in like several days ago over that and tried to calm the tensions. And it actually was not the outbreak of violence that first made the Israelis first halve and then completely stop the aid. That originally was a response to the slow pace of the bodies returning. And it's interesting, of course, that the aid is addressed in the ceasefire agreement. But of course, lawyers will say, well, actually, that's simply a condition of international law. So it shouldn't be part of an agreement. It is basic international humanitarian law.
And we understand aid will resume its flow into Gaza today. Is that right?
I don't think we can count the aid convoy until it actually starts off. We've had several false starts on this. So the promise was to have opened the Rafah crossing. Now that is probably jeopardized somewhat by it being the location of the violence that broke out between Hamas and the IDF over the weekend. So I think that we have to wait until that happens to be absolutely sure, because there's just been a few false starts.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. What then of the arrival of Special Envoy Witkoff, of Jared Kushner and of Vice President Vance tomorrow? And actually, Vance's his comments on the violence over the weekend, I think somewhat playing down perhaps what happened. Catherine, what's your analysis here? He says there will be fits and starts in the truce. Hamas is going to fire on Israel. Israel is going to have to respond. We think that it has the best chance for a sustainable peace. Even if it does that, it's going to have hills and valleys, and we're going to have to monitor the situation. I suppose he's being realistic in his commentary there, the Vice President.
Yeah, he's being absolutely correct. I mean, I wouldn't say any differently. It obviously is. It's such a complex picture on the ground. But I think, again, this speaks to the anxiety of the Americans not to allow this process to be derailed. Trump has invested a lot of political capital in this, so much so even that he didn't respond to the footage of Hamas executing rivals in a square in Gaza City, and said, "Oh well, they were just some bad guys." So that there is enormous determination to keep this on track, and of course they will be there also, not only to keep it on track and to perhaps stop some of the more extreme members of the Israeli government who are publicly lobbying Netanyahu to go back into full combat, saying that it can only happen militarily. They miss with ceasefire deal anyway. But the next stage is to get onto phase 2, and that's going to be the hardest of all because it involves Hamas disarming, which is not something they've actually promised to do yet. So I think that this is the easy stuff. The hard stuff is still ahead.
Yeah, and is there progress being made on phase 2? Is there any kind of behind the scenes progress on that, despite the fact that perhaps phase 1 can't be said to be totally complete at this stage? Does progress continue in the background?
Less than you'd expect or that you'd want. I mean, this issue of disarmament is absolutely key. I think we're going to see disagreements about exactly how that happens. I think Hamas are determined not to hand over weapons to Israel. They would like to hand them over to either an Arab force or to a Palestinian force that will come into Gaza. But, the conditions are just not right for that yet, even though there are Palestinian police personnel in non-Hamas. They've come from the West Bank, but they've been training in Egypt and in Jordan. And the hope is that they will be deployed at some point. But, this Arab stabilization force is not complete yet. People have told us that it's going to be months, perhaps, until they're in there.
I want to ask you as well, Catherine, about the Israeli Premier League derby between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Hapoel Tel Aviv, which was cancelled before it kicked off yesterday after what police described as public disorder and violent riots. 12 civilians and 3 officers were injured, 9 people were arrested, 16 detained for questioning. And of course, this is particularly pertinent for us in the UK because it's just a couple of days after it was announced that Maccabi fans should not be allowed to attend their upcoming match at Aston Villa in November because of safety concerns. What can you tell us about the trouble?
I think that the police pounced on it very quickly, and they talked of a risk to life. There were a lot of pyrotechnics being thrown around, but it has to be said that Maccabi Tel Aviv have a reputation for quite extreme football violence. That they are, I could draw comparisons with past certain English clubs that are notorious in the past for having fomented violence, and they've had 2 matches suspended within Israel in the last 8 months. We've seen trouble in Spain. We've seen trouble in Amsterdam. And their reputation is not merely for violence, but also racism. They've chanted some things that would get a club kicked out of the Premier League in England at their matches, and they've directed racist hatred towards people in some of their trips overseas. So I think this is quite challenging now for the British government, having sort of weighed in on this and perhaps not really considered that side of it and looked at it from a political point of view rather than actually a public order point of view.
Yeah.